So why is privacy by design such an important concept? If we could have our next panelist come on up. And we're going to talk about privacy in a connected world. And I'm going to do a little bit of an intro. We have some presentations that'll be a part of this. And then we're going to open it up for questions. For those who are interested and are watching either via the live stream or maybe you're just following along on Twitter, if you want to send in any questions, please use the hashtag UMichTalks, UMichTalks, or hashtag privacyaware. So let me frame this a little bit before we get to our presenters. You wake up and your alarm's going off. No, it's not an alarm clock, who uses those anymore, but it's your phone or it's your smartwatch or it's an implant. Your connected home's aware that there's movement in the room, and it opens your shades, it turns on your lights, it adjusts the temperature. Your fitness device or your app or your implant has sent your sleep information to your health information hub, and it's now monitoring and sending info on your blood pressure and your heart rate. You tell your smart home hub to start the coffee, turn on the TV to your favorite station. You ask it to lift the toilet seat for you and play some songs out of the toilet's embedded apps and speakers. You laugh, but it's real, and it's now. You walk from the bathroom to the kitchen. A camera with artificial intelligence recognizes your face, takes pictures of you, gauges your mood based on your expression, even as you watch a similar feed from your children's bedroom. You get to the kitchen. Your fridge begins streaming the news on the screen that's embedded in the door, and it also tells you, thanks to an internal camera and other sensors, that you're low on milk. It's made a shopping list for you, by the way, as well, based on multiple feeds, including a device embedded in your trash can, and an order is going to be dropped off by a drone later. The fridge is also making breakfast suggestions for you based on your mood, your eating history, your health history, your fitness information, and what available ingredients it has inside. After breakfast, your caloric intake, by the way, monitored and sent to that health hub. You get your exercise gear on. Embedded sensors help you hold your yoga poses longer, measure your muscle effort, and then you decide to follow up with a jog. You head out. Your home sensors and cameras notice you leave. They dim the lights, they lower the temperature, they engage in alarms. Your exercise gear is now tracking you, seeing what your ground contact time is, your pelvic rotation, your stride length. It's sunny, but worry not. Your shirt also has some sensors to tell if you're getting too much sun. After you jog, you stop for a cup of coffee. Well, why do you stop? You got a third-party ad that was sent to you for a coupon for a latte. That ad was based on a geolocation. Maybe that was based on your phone, your Fitbit, your implant, who knows? So you go, you get your coffee, no wallet, you're out jogging, there's no problem. Your phone or your clothing or your smartwatch, they can all pay for you. Next, you swing by a convenience store. The combination of computer vision, aggregation of data from different sensors, and machine learning tells what you grab and what you buy, and you just walk out with whatever it is that you wanted to swipe out of the store. Payment happens automatically. Heading home, connected cars move to avoid you as you jog on the street. They share the information with other cars as well as connected transportation sensors. It helps that the input in the smart car technology is based on brain signals and other physiological measures like heart rate, pupil size, and other things that help people drive more safely. And other inputs that the cars help to actually move towards monitoring your mental state. Are you an angry driver today? You get back to your house using a biometric, an iris scan, a facial scan, whatever. Or maybe it's an RFID chip implanted in you. You get in the house. And all of your health information has now been recorded in the hub. You review and respond to some emails via your home's smart hub. Get into your connected car, and geez, what a wonderful world we live in. All of those things that I ran through and more are there today. That is the world of the future, and that part of the future is really now. So I didn't touch on how the information may be consumed or amplified with social media. I didn't go into the depth of how such information can be vacuumed up or shared with advertisers, the government. So what are the privacy and ethical issues and considerations that accompany life in an interconnected, quasi-omniscient world that we live in today? To examine this question and much more, I want to introduce you to our panelists, and I'm going to introduce in presenting order. So first, Susan Gelman, Heinz Werner Distinguished University Professor of Psychology and Linguistics from the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. Sarita Schonenbeck, Assistant Professor of Information at the School of Information. Alex Halderman, Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the College of Engineering, also Director for the Center of Computer Security and Society. And Florian, you've already met. So Susan, with that, if you want to go ahead and start, and here is a mic.
Excellent. Thank you. So thank you for including me on this. I am not an expert on privacy, but I study children, and I got interested in the question of how children think about privacy as it relates to mobile devices. So I want to tell you a little bit of what I've been thinking about and some of the data that we have and some of the implications, I think, of these findings. So I want to start with this quote. This was a headline from an article about this device called Google Clips. It's a lightweight camera that you can just like plunk down anywhere, turn it on, and then it uses machine learning algorithms to decide when it's actually going to take images. And people think it's great because, you know, they can capture candid images, like of their kids playing. If they tried to, you know, in person take those pictures, their kids would like stiffen up and it wouldn't be a good picture. So, you know, it's really cool. But on the other hand, it's, in a way, it's like letting you spy on your family. So it's really creepy. And that's why I think this headline is so apt, because it shows that, I think in a nutshell, the problem is that these technologies are so seductive and so functional. We want to be able to use them in our lives. Everything that Saul went over in his example, you know, in some ways sounded really great, except for the implant piece of it. And so we're willing to sign away our privacy rights. It's like, yeah, like I know it's really creepy and I know it might be taking images that it shouldn't be taking, but that's okay because I get this really cool functionality out of it. So the idea that I want you to think about, and I think we have indirect evidence that this may be going on, not direct evidence, is that maybe we're raising a new generation of kids who don't care about privacy at all. So we know that kids are surrounded by devices that, you know, they're using their phones, but then there are also devices that are deliberately created in order for parents to track children or for children to track their belongings. So this is something that kids grow up with nowadays. They're very used to. But we know almost nothing about how children think about these devices. You know, are they concerned about the privacy issues? Are they oblivious to the privacy issues? So we wanted to get some initial data to look at this question. And so we did a series of experiments with over 300 children and adults that we interviewed and were included in our experimental studies. And in these experiments, we first demonstrated how a digital tracking device works. So we got kids in the lab. We said, like, here's one of these devices. Here's how it works. Try it out yourself. Make predictions. They got that instantly. Understanding how these devices work was very straightforward, even for our youngest children who are 4 years old in the study. But then the key question that we asked was, is it okay or not okay for a stranger to track someone else's possessions, and why? And you know, there are a couple of different competing kind of predictions that we went into this work having. So on the one hand, we thought, well, you know, kids are notoriously possessive about their toys. They hate it when someone tries to take their toys away from them. They'll fight to the death. And so we thought that maybe privacy would be kind of construed on analogy to ownership of a toy. Just like you can't touch my stuff, maybe you can't track my stuff. So maybe they would have this very early developing understanding that privacy is something that an owner holds over their possessions. On the other hand, from an amazingly early age, children are drawn to technology. They find it very intuitive. They find it very appealing. And it can be quite hard to even extract kids away from phones or iPads or other kinds of electronic devices. So maybe there would just be this baseline assumption that technology is good, it's cool, I can trust it. So we design in these experiments, I won't go into detail, but the key questions were, children were asked, basically, is it okay for you to look on a computer to see where your backpack is? We had a variety of items, not just backpacks, but also favorite objects, pets, and so forth. And is it okay for a stranger, Sam, to look on a computer to see where your backpack is? Very slight shift, but an important shift. One, as adults, we think that an owner has the right to track their possessions, but we're not so keen about letting a stranger do the same thing. So I will show you the developmental patterns here, and they're quite clear. The youngest children, so you can see we had children between 4 and 10, and we had college students as well. The 4-year-olds, anything above that line, like these 2 bars, means that they thought it was a good thing. They thought it was a positive thing to track the location of these items. So they thought it was great if they could track their own things, 4-year-olds, and they thought it was great for Sam to be able to track their things. 5-year-olds start to get slightly less happy about someone else tracking their things, but it wasn't until 6 or 7 years of age that they were significantly different between those 2 conditions. It was a more pronounced pattern by 8 to 10, but then all of the children looked qualitatively different from the college students. The college students, as you can see by that bar I highlighted, thought it was really bad for a non-owner to track an owner's possessions. They thought the consequences could be bad, but they also just thought it was weird and suspect and morally not right. I mean, there was just like a really emotional sense that they expressed. And we could see it in their explanations, so this is just to show the child versus adult responses. I put up this cartoon. Adults often would say things like, that's a breach of privacy, he has no business to know where I am at all times. And then when kids, on the rare occasion where they said they didn't like someone tracking their stuff, they would say things like, the button might fall off, the tracker button. So they didn't really seem to be aware of any of the moral implications. And we could see this also in the kinds of explanations they provided when we asked them why. Why should someone not do this? And you could see that those moral explanations started to go up at about 6 to 7, and then much more by adulthood. So it's, somewhat surprisingly to me, privacy concerns didn't emerge until about 6 to 7 years of age. And even up through age 10, children seemed completely untroubled by a stranger tracking their possessions or even themselves, and that's in sharp contrast to college students. A big question for us is why? When you get a difference between a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old, is that because the 10-year-old hasn't yet developed into the 18-year-old? Will that 10-year-old in 8 years look just like the college student? Or is there a difference because they're growing up in different circumstances and they're from different generations? And just like, from a personal perspective, when I was a kid, if you had something private, you put it in a diary and you locked it with a key and you made sure no one had access to your private thoughts. But now there are new concepts, words in the language that suggest a shift. I think oversharing was the word of the year in like 2009, something like that. That didn't even exist as a concept before. Or TMI. You'll always be one of a few hundred people with whom I feel totally comfortable sharing my deepest secrets. It seems potentially, perhaps, a new and different way of thinking about privacy and how that relates to other people. So I think in the future it'll be important to think about how to educate children about digital privacy. So we have rules in place. The American Academy of Pediatrics has guidelines for how much screen time children should have. We should also have guidelines for digital privacy and informing kids. It would be important to understand what's going on in adolescence, a very important and relatively understudied period here. And I think longitudinal data to address this question of whether a 10-year-old becomes the 18-year-old today or whether there are generational differences going on. And that will help us understand whether privacy is a concept that we'll hold on to or something that maybe is going to go away altogether. So, and I want to thank my collaborators on this project, Natalie Davidson, Megan Martinez, and Nick Knowles.
So thank you, Susan. We're to go on to sort of sequentially here, but I hope you all are gathering questions up. We're going to have ample time for questions at the end, and one of mine is, you've already hit on, is this nature or technical nurture? So Sarita.
Thank you. So Susan suggested that children may not be very good at managing their own privacy, and I'm going to argue that children, like everything good in life, can blame it all on their parents. So when I was young, I had a friend who loved to antagonize his own parents, and he would do things like look at them straight in the eyes and break a pencil, and then when he was getting punished, he would laugh because he knew it would drive them nuts. And I often wonder, what would it be like if his parents' experiences as they were kind of raising this child were documented in some way for him to come look at later, for them to come look at later. But instead, they kind of sort of dissipate in memory. But that was 30 years ago. Today, with social media, you see parents documenting the waves and the experiences of all kinds of parenting challenges and joys. So, whatever you're experiencing as a parent, there's going to be an online site for you as a parent. So there are sites for parents for sports, for ballet. There are sites for fathers who have anger management problems with their children. There are sites for moms to vent anonymously. There are sites for new dads, for single dads, for stay-at-home dads, for gay dads. There are groups for parents of children with terminal cancer or with ADHD. And there's sites for new moms to join up with other moms who do the same month as them. For this one, Baby Center's January 2018 Birth Club, those are moms that are due this month, there's 30,000 members who have already posted 180,000 posts, and their babies are now barely born, right? So parents are sharing millions of posts and photos and comments about their children every day. As a result, for the first time in history, children are growing up with this online identity that was established without their permission or their consent, often starting before they're even born. So what can we do as researchers, as people, to try to protect children's privacy as they are growing into this online identity that was crafted for them, often starting in utero? So in one study, we asked parents why they shared photos and content about their children online. And one main reason is that it's validating for them. When they receive likes and comments from other people, they feel validated as a good parent. They also share information with each other. They share social support with each other. And for parents in particularly challenging situations, for example, parents whose children have been diagnosed with a disability or special need, they said that after the diagnosis, the first place they went was Google, but social media was the lifeline for them. They could find parents, older parents typically, who are raising children with the same condition, for example, and they could try to envision what their own child's life might look like months or even years into the future. That was immensely valuable for them. They could also learn how to advocate for their child, so things like navigating school systems and healthcare systems. In another study, we asked teenagers, to build on Susan's suggestion, we asked teenagers what they thought about their parents sharing information about them online. And you might be surprised that children were typically okay with their parents sharing about them. But they had a couple rules or preferences for their parents. One was limit oversharing, which is sharing too much and over-disclosing things about them. The second was no negative content, things like fights and punishments. And the third was limit embarrassing content, which for teenagers was boyfriend-girlfriend photos and social peer group photos. We even asked college students, University of Michigan undergraduates, who are now entering young adulthood, how they felt about older content that they had shared about themselves when they were younger on social media. So they had photos of themselves as preteens on sites like Facebook and MySpace, where they're sharing music lyrics, they're sharing all those silly quizzes they used to do, or maybe we all still do. They're sharing 50 variations of the same photo. Remember iPhoto booth or whatever it's called? They say that they're embarrassed by these old photos, but typically they don't delete them because that would be inauthentic to their prior identities. So we're at a crossroads in internet history. The current generation of children who are transitioning now into young adulthood are the first generation to have their digital identities shaped, crafted online since they were born by other people than themselves. So I have 3 recommendations based on our research for how we can respect and attend to children's privacy in these online environments. And these 3 lessons share one underlying principle, which is that we treat parents and children, families in general, as allies rather than as adversaries. So the first one is that parents should ask permission of their children before sharing about them. But in our studies, they don't have to ask every time. They just have to ask enough times that they can learn their children's preferences and then try to respect them going into the future. The second one is that parents need to make these cost-benefit analyses of when it makes sense for them to share about their children or not. So we've talked about the benefits to parents, which is validation of parenting, sharing information, sharing social support. The costs tend to be more murky, and I'm sure we'll talk about them in these panels. It could be things related to advertising, to bullying and harassment, identity theft. And parents will have to think about what are the benefits that they experience with these sort of murky and unknown costs that children might experience as they grow up. And then third, we make the argument that technology companies should develop mechanisms to better transfer ownership of content from parents or from other people to children as they come of age. And this draws from the field of archival studies, which has a long history, decades or even centuries, of thinking about how do you preserve individuals' privacy when their personal content is made public or transferred to other people. So we make the same argument for children. As they become of age, as they enter adolescence and young adulthood, what are ways that we can start to transfer content that contains them to them in terms of ownership? And we also think that computing should build off of this in the sense that many computational advancements like sensing, like facial recognition, like voice recognition are going to be able to pull together children's disparate identities across sites like Reddit and Baby Center and Facebook and into a complete dossier of the child. So we should be thinking about how do we facilitate the child to take ownership over that content. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarita. So now I've heard about the seductiveness of technology, and tying it back to Ann Cavoukian and privacy by design, can we have data possession by design? So let's keep going down the row. Alex Halderman.
All right, thanks, Saul. In honor of Privacy Day, I'm going to keep my thoughts to myself. No, just kidding. So I thought the story that Saul opened with today was just awesome, because all of these different things that technology does that have privacy implications really are here today. We really are living in this world where tech collects and distributes information about us in ways that were never before possible. But I think the one thing in Saul's story that was maybe notably absent was anything bad happening as a result of that. And I think it's important to keep that in mind at the same time, that what we really are concerned about with privacy is certain kinds of negative implications of data being distributed, whether those are moral implications, whether those are financial or legal, theft, embarrassment, government or corporate abuses of power. There are specific things that we worry about happening, and it's useful in each case to think about what is being enabled or prevented by new technology. But with that in mind, that there are certain specific classes of harms that we worry about when we worry about privacy. I'd like to celebrate some of what technology is doing well. Because for certain kinds of threats and in certain kinds of situations, tech today provides more privacy and more powerful tools for individual control than have ever been available before in the history of humanity. So think about things as simple as sending a message, a communication to someone else. We have encrypted messenger applications like Signal that are strong enough, perhaps, to defeat many of the world's governments and are available for free in the hands of virtually everybody. I go to Washington now this is my sabbatical, and I'm going to Washington regularly to work on policy issues. And every journalist and every staffer on Capitol Hill is using encrypted messaging to make sure that what they say is going to be protected from government. That's awesome in a certain way, that technology is enabling not only individuals with perhaps very little to hide, but individuals with perhaps quite a bit to hide from government spying to act with confidence. And it's never been possible before to send a message to the other side of the world with a pretty high assurance that nobody but nobody is going to be able to read it. Or think about the web and the way we get information from publishers, right? You now have the ability to use encrypted web communication with HTTPS to send and receive information from a growing number of websites. It used to be that just about 3 years ago that less than 40% of connections to websites worldwide were encrypted. Today, that number has increased by more than 50%. It's now more than 60% of all connections and growing very fast, in part because of work we started here at the University of Michigan with something called Let's Encrypt, a service that lets websites very easily adopt encrypted HTTPS. But thinking about that, right, the ability to get information from sources worldwide, often without saying who you are, especially if you use services like Tor that let you browse from essentially an anonymous location, is also something that's a power not totally new in kind, but a power that's become much, much easier to achieve and has been, thanks to recent advances, has become something that's relatively easy to use and in the hands of almost everyone. To give one more example that I think is going to be one we can talk about, we'll be able to talk about a lot, even services like Facebook, where many of us like to argue people are oversharing, they also provide very fine-grained and detailed controls about how your information is going to be shared and with whom. And they may not always be easy to understand, but once you do understand them, they can allow you to manage your social life and what you share with different subsets of people more easily and more securely than has ever been possible without the aid of technology in that form of management. So I don't want to only celebrate the positive. There are a lot of problems with the implementation of these controls, with people's ability to understand them, with even sometimes the fundamental cryptography or the implementations of it. And these are all things that we study in computer science. But I think in a world where technology does give you tools to control your privacy, if you take the time to understand how those tools work and what the limitations are, you can do really, really well for yourself, despite Saul's world of ubiquitous sensing, of automation, and of increasingly vast collections of information being devised and searched and algorithmically analyzed. Thank you.
So the asterisk there is, that is just the world. I just live here. But what I do here is, again, as we have seductive technologies that are allowing all of these data to be collected, to be shared, to be aggregated, to be moved around, there's technological counterpoints to some of it that are privacy friendly, privacy enabling. And on top of that, and I have a feeling Florian may touch on this, even those existing tools that we think of might be privacy invasive or push us towards oversharing, like Facebook, they do have fine-grained tools built into them, but sometimes maybe they're not so easy to use.
Yeah, thanks for the segue. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about, right? So we have this kind of interesting juxtaposition where on the one hand we have these privacy issues that people are facing and the oversharing, and on the other hand we have actually really good privacy enhancing tools that no one's using or very little people are using, or at least not the large population. Right, so I'm kind of somewhere in the middle between. So I'm thinking about how can we help people make better privacy decisions. And the truth is people struggle to make good privacy decisions when they want to share information. And that's not because they don't care for privacy, right? Like if you look at surveys, and surveys again, they show people are concerned about privacy, but they just feel like they lost control over their information. And they often want to do more about privacy, but they don't even know where to start. And this is not just an issue of being lazy or not taking the efforts to trying to understand the tools or the privacy controls. In a study we conducted recently with undocumented immigrants, we looked at how they manage risk. This is a community that has very heightened risk. If they're found out to be undocumented, they risk deportation. And what we found is that while they have very high risk awareness in their daily lives and they go to great lengths to avoid risks, they really struggle to translate these protective measures to the use of technology. And they're using Facebook and other mechanisms as well as we do, or as anyone else does. So it's not just being lazy or not really thinking about it. There's more to it. So what my research team and I are looking at is how can we help people better manage their privacy in these complex socio-technical systems we're living in and working in. Right? And I just wanted to offer like 3 pathways, potential solutions or directions that are important. One is we need to provide people with relevant information about privacy. Right? Like what we often see is this. Privacy policies. Who here has read a privacy policy in 2018? Okay, all right. I would hope to have some hands go up at a privacy event. Thank you. Right? But that's not the norm. Like often people don't read privacy policies. And there's a reason for that. They're not meant for them. Privacy policies are written by lawyers for lawyers. They're written by company lawyers to protect against liability, limit liability, show compliance with laws and regulations. And on the other hand, we have enforcement agencies like the Federal Trade Commission or data protection authorities that are happy to look at these privacy policies and say like, yes, you're compliant or you're violating a law, so we need to do something about that. So they serve a certain function, but people are kind of left out of the picture. And they can't really make sense of this. So what we're arguing for is a more user-centric approach of delivering privacy information to people. So in addition to these privacy policies that have their purpose and their use, we need small, concise notices that really inform users and also give them some real choices to act on. Right now, I can either accept Facebook's privacy policy or I can go to a different social network. Like, what would that be, right? It's not that much choice. So in our research, what we started doing is looking at all the different ways and dimensions, the timing, channel, how can we actually display and provide information to privacy information to users in a more meaningful way. And I can't go through all of this, but what I want you to take away is that there are actually lots of really creative opportunities to convey privacy information in the context, in the situation where it is relevant to people. And these messages can be really short, but they can make a big difference for people to actually take action and control their privacy. And we don't have to just rely on companies to implement this and hope like, oh, maybe one day that's going to happen. In a research collaboration with Carnegie Mellon University, we've been working on automatically analyzing privacy policies with natural language processing, machine learning, and crowdsourcing to kind of extract the data practices and then present them to users in more meaningful ways. if we do this, that's great, right? We can provide relevant information, but this information is really only useful to people if it's also actionable. If I give you information and you can't do anything with it, you say like, okay, what now, right? So we need to make this information actionable. So as part of the usable privacy policy project, we're working on not just extracting all the information from the privacy policies, but particularly looking for opt-out choices. Are there any kind of, can you opt out of marketing emails, for example? And we're building a browser extension that if you go to a website, you can look at this extension and you actually see directly the opt-outs that are available to you on that particular website to quickly take action. So it's bringing that information to the forefront and making it easier for people to actually react to it. In a different work, we developed what we call privacy nudges for smartphones, where once per day you get a message like this that says, hey, did you know your location has been shared 5,398 times with a bunch of apps, right? These are real numbers from a field study we conducted. But what's important about this message is it's not just telling you that this is going on in the background on your phone, it also lets you change your settings. Right? You can go to your privacy settings. And we ran a field study with this over multiple weeks. And what we found is that even if we just pop these messages up randomly throughout the day for people, we got people to switch away from whatever they were doing and start managing their privacy settings because they were so concerned with these numbers, and we made it easy for them to do something about it. So lowering the barrier for people to act on their concerns. And what also plays into this is that we need to think better about how we can integrate these privacy controls into the interaction with technology. You won't be able to have these messages for every little data bit that's collected in Saul's scenario, right? That's going to be really tough. So in some other work, we've been looking at how we can actually automatically have systems adapt to users. Here in this case, there's a display that automatically adjusts to whoever walks into the room and the privacy preferences for these people. It's a calendar display, right? So the person walks in, you see the calendar clears, there it's gone, and then it's reloaded with privacy settings applied. And we're currently expanding this to smart speakers, Amazon Alexa, Google Home, and so forth, which are super convenient, but they're also really creepy, but because you basically have a live microphone in your house all the time. So what we're looking at is there a way to actually determine when the microphone should be on? So we've been experimenting with gaze detection to see, maybe it's sufficient to turn the microphone on when you're actually looking at the device. And this is working relatively well. So in summary, providing relevant information, making information actionable, and embedding privacy better into interaction are ways how we can get people to really take control of their privacy. It's about enabling them to take action, and not just, that's what we want to do. And I think if we achieve this, then we can actually have privacy in a connected world, but we're unfortunately still not there yet.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions, but I want to open it up to the audience. Encourage, again, for those folks who are watching the live stream, if you want to send in messages via Twitter, UMich Talks, or Privacy Aware, we're scanning for those. But please, if you have questions, raise hands. Let's hear from more of the panelists. Are you really going to let... I
have a question for Dr. Gelman, of course. Was there a particular reason, other than the obvious ones, why you did not include teenagers in your study? You stopped at 10 and then went to college age.
That's a good question. Honestly, it's because we couldn't imagine that by 10 years of age, kids wouldn't be horrified by the privacy implications of this stranger tracking, their backpack, their special favorite object, their pet. We even included, one of the items was their elbow. So 10-year-olds were really not concerned about it the way the adults were. So when we set up the study, we thought, for sure by the end of elementary school, they're going to look like adults. And so we were surprised by that.
So I'm also not going to limit it. Panelists, if you have questions for your co-panelists.
So you were expecting to find that the children would just think that was innately creepy, right?
Yes, because there's a lot of work showing that by 2 years of age, children are highly sensitive to who owns an object and who doesn't own an object, and that that there are ownership rights, and they apply, they apply across the board. And so we thought that tracking rights would be seen as a type of ownership right.
And I wonder if it's just that they don't associate any bad outcome with tracking at all, because that's something I suppose we have to develop, that you might hypothesize we have to develop an aversion to for a reason, that something bad happened because we were followed by someone.
Yeah, I think that may be part of what's going on. And one study that we're doing now is varying whether the two individuals are members of the same social group or different social groups. And our hypothesis is that when we have the two individuals from different social groups, that will heighten their suspicion, and then they will maybe think of possible negative outcomes. But the other thing I wanted to mention was that the adults did talk about possible negative outcomes. They came up with all kinds of possibilities, kidnapping, robbery, all kinds of things. But then it's also the case that a lot of their objection was really in principle. And they would say things like, even if nothing bad happened, this is not right. So there was a sense in which it was really seen as a moral issue, and that was something that I thought we would see in the kids, because they do see ownership as a moral issue.
Along the same line, I'm thinking that the younger children have parents and grandparents and neighbors and aunts and uncles who they trust. And so they are surrounded by people, their environment says this is okay. The college student perhaps did not grow up in that environment, so they may be more skeptical from the get-go. So if you're doing your predictions ahead from a group who are in an environment where everyone around them is saying this is okay, have you factored in how what impact that might have?
I would love to know the answer to that. We can't from our current data, because it was a really homogeneous, it was an Ann Arbor sample. So, upper middle class for the most part, well-educated parents, children living in secure environments. And I do think that this question kind of raises somewhat of a dilemma for how to teach children about privacy concerns, because you don't want the message to children to be that the world is this terrible, dangerous place with people who are out to get you. You want them to be appropriately cautious, but there's also sort of a value about, we're part of a larger community, and it's probably, there are many negatives about being instantly suspicious of everyone you don't know. So it's tough.
So while microphone's moving, Sarita, I have a question. If we are in a world where we have an online identity and presence provided by our parents before we're even born or while we're in utero, how does that factor into this? How does that factor into this notion of an omniscient surveillance that's been going on with data sharing about you since you were born?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's studies yet that I know of, but there's definitely evidence, sort of observational evidence, that young children are becoming aware at a very young age, 3 and 4, I think, when their parents take a photo of them, that it may or may not be going to Facebook, this thing out there that they'll be uploading. So they're getting a sense of maybe not necessarily focused on privacy so much, but the sense that they're performing for this other audience, which is related to who's seeing this. Do I know these people? Well, my parents trust them. So I think there's what may or may not be clear from my talk, but I support the idea of parents sharing online. But the outcome, the goal is for parents to be thoughtful about who's seeing what they're posting and whether it's worth what their children might think as they grow up, right? So thinking about who the audience is, which you talked about, Alex talked about. If parents are educated about how Facebook works and how to use privacy settings, that's vastly different than if they're not and they're sharing publicly without knowing it.
So I know there's questions out in the audience somewhere.
Just one more comment about the cohort study. Could it just be a matter of the older cohorts have a greater need for privacy, for example, with transcripts, job applications, income tax forms, whereas the younger cohorts do not?
Yes, I think that's why it's so important to look at a group of children over time as those, so you can track when do these needs for privacy come in. I mean, I do think adolescents are such an interesting group to study as well, because they start doing things that they legitimately don't want their parents to know about, which is less true at a younger age as well.
So one of the challenges we also see why people struggle to think about privacy is the implications are often abstract and vague, right? Like it's, be it kids, be it adolescents, be it adults, unless you've experienced identity theft and had an issue, right, that makes you cautious going forward, like what's going on, or who you share information with. But often people might have this like underlying sense or vague notion that there might be a privacy problem, but kind of like articulating even what the privacy problem is often very difficult until something happens, and that might not be the case until like ways down the road. And even worse, often you might not even have a visible outcome or threat, right? Like if you're not getting invited to the job interview based on a public Facebook post you didn't even know about anymore from 10 years ago, right, you will never learn that that was the reason. So sometimes these privacy implications are so far down the road and so opaque that it's just very difficult to understand or anticipate their implications.
But that's interesting, the role of intuition in people's privacy decisions. And intuition can often be a very helpful signal that, boy, maybe I need to think more about this if you're getting the right kind of instinct. But I suppose on the other hand, it can work against you too. If you think, for instance, that there must be something wrong with sharing this information, this is creepy, when there isn't an articulable problem that might result from that, or the probability of the problem resulting is very, very small. So I wonder whether in some ways the intuitions of people who have grown up with social networking may be more accurate than the intuitions of our generation and many other older people about, oh, something bad is bound to happen if I do this. No, maybe it's just that people are more comfortable maintaining a separate public and private persona and realizing that that's how most other people live too, and that terrible things aren't happening to most of their friends by having the same attitudes about privacy. I wonder.
So I know there's some other questions in the audience.
So this is a question for all of the panelists broadly. What is the role of government and government regulations, both for privacy and security? I'm wondering both broadly, but also specifically related to the Internet of Things.
So I wish that government were doing more to regulate the Internet of Things. And I can't say that about too many areas of computer technology, because computer technology has, in many areas, thrived in the absence of regulation. Unfortunately, in IoT security and privacy both, we currently have a very poor level of practice that people buy devices, those devices have bugs, those bugs result in security and privacy problems, and maybe the devices never get updated, the people never learn that there was a problem at all unless something bad happens as a result. I think there's a lot of room for government to provide certain minimal standards or certification practices for companies that want to sell IoT devices to consumers. And those could include things such as a duty to make sure that there will be some money set aside to maintain and repair these devices for a period of time, since they're going to continue to operate in people's homes, perhaps even after the company in the normal course of business would stop supporting them. Another thing that would be really useful for IoT security and privacy would be just for the ability for your local network, not the internet at large, but your local network, like Saul over at ITS, to know what kind of IoT device you had plugged into the network so that he could help alert you when it's known that there's a problem with it. So there are maybe one more category is in liability and ensuring that companies that are manufacturing or retailing certain kinds of devices provide some kind of recourse to people who are downstream consumers. Currently, if there is currently just so many IoT devices, when we bring them into the laboratory, have egregious problems that leak information, that expose your network, but that are caused by very, very basic errors in the design and construction. Things that there's no excuse for making these kinds of errors. And I think part of the reason for that is that we don't have more of a liability regime in place for security. And we can talk more about what that might look like, but I fear I've gone on too long already.
Regarding privacy more generally, there's also this issue that here in the United States, we don't have a general law that protects privacy. We have sector-specific laws that protect your health information, that protect children online. And a couple of other areas. Whereas if you look to Europe with the General Data Protection Regulation, but even with the European Data Protection Directive before that, you have one general law that says that protects privacy in all areas. It doesn't matter what kind of technology you're building, right? Someone who wants to sell that device needs to show that they have your consent to collect that data, and they must adhere to privacy by design. And they actually have a very interesting liability aspect built in, which is that if you're found to violate the GDPR, there's a penalty, I think, up to 3 or 5% of your global revenue, potentially, right? 5, 4? 4, okay, in the middle.
Wow.
Right. So that's huge, right? If we ever will see a case that makes use of that to that extent, we have to see. The GDPR is going into effect in May this year, and every company in Europe and in the US is currently up in arms to try to be GDPR compliant, and no one even knows what that really means. So that's going to be interesting to watch over the next couple of years. What I find promising and what gives me hope is that while companies are trying to comply with the European data protection regulation, they're actually also strengthening privacy controls more generally. So Facebook just announced that they're going to revise their privacy center and make it easier for people to control their privacy settings. And that's a direct result of them trying to comply with the GDPR. And I'm very happy to see that they actually make it available globally, hopefully, and not just in Europe. So I think, yeah, what can policymakers do? It's I think we need to strive for a general consumer privacy protection law in the US eventually that kind of allows innovation to happen, technology innovation to happen, but at the same time ensures that it doesn't happen at the price of people's privacy.
So I see some hands up. Yep, and right here.
I have a microphone already. I have a comment and sort of question about the extent to which looking at privacy generically is effective. And it seems to me there are really 3 different processes, and the source of the information and terms under which it's collected are important. So there's voluntary participation in social media, and one can opt out. Maybe the price of that is very high. There's also mandatory collection of data. You can't say, I won't file my income tax because I don't want to share information about my income or other aspects of my life. And then there's really passive data collection, the sensor networks, things that are out there gathering data about you that you aren't even aware of. And it's just most of the discussion, it seems to me, so far has been about I have an option, it may be complicated for me to see what those options are, but what about the other two situations, the passive data collection and mandatory, where you don't have an opt-out option?
And I would layer on the mandatory certain types of other surveillance that may be related to government surveillance.
So regarding mandatory collection or gathering of data, those are often the areas where we see regulation, right? So if you file your taxes, you're protected by the Privacy Act. There's a limit on how this data can be used. You don't have a choice if credit bureaus collect your data to calculate credit scores, but there's the Fair Credit Reporting Act that's supposed to protect you. Whether these laws are effective, different story, right? So that's often what we see. I think this notion of passive collection, our environment around us collecting data, right? Anytime you walk in a building here, you swipe your card, like there's a data record of that. I think that's the new challenging area that we're trying to figure out. I think the cop-out answer is, oh, well, you know, it's going to be de-identified. There's not going to be any personal identifiable information associated with it. It's going to be fine. But it turns out, and I'm sure Alex might be able to comment on this more, it's actually really difficult to de-identify data. Just removing the name is not going to do the trick. So I think we're figuring this out. And also the next panel will talk more about this, hopefully.
Right, and I think that category is the one that's raising the most interesting new challenges, the different kinds of passive collection, where you don't have no rights about this, right? There is in telecommunications law, there are limitations to what carriers can do. There are limitations on what people can do from outside of your home, presumably, to look into the home. But we don't have anywhere near, I think, a well-developed legal or even conceptual framework for thinking about it. In other areas, so much of privacy is about the idea of control and being able to control who can learn what about you. But when you don't know that the information is being collected at all, that's challenging. I think that control idea also brings us back to what your research is doing, Florian, that so much of it is about helping us to understand what it is that's being shared and what we can do about it, which I think is a necessary precondition to having effective control.
The discussion a few minutes ago about the difference between Europe and the U.S. brings up something I don't think it's been brought up yet, which I'm just sort of curious your reaction. I believe as part of GDPR, now officially the right to be forgotten is now going to be enshrined in European law. Thanks. It doesn't even seem to be discussed on this side of the ocean. I mean, in some sense, I find interesting that this has now become sort of accepted as a basic privacy principle in Europe, but over here, there doesn't seem to be a lot of discussion of it, a lot of debate, and just sort of wondering why the difference. And, you know, it's a harder problem. Maybe I find what's interesting about it is that the other side of it, which is there a right to find out things about, especially public individuals, and just the whole discussion seems not to be getting a lot of attention over here.
Yeah, I think we have a right to remember as well.
Yeah, I mean, so regarding the right to be forgotten, technically it's very difficult to achieve. And so what we see in Europe, it's really a right to not be indexed in search engines rather than a right to be forgotten. So the goal of this law is not necessarily that, let's say there's a news article about you that's, you know, true, but, you know, not maybe very favorable for you maybe. You don't have the right to have that article deleted. You have the right to prevent that article from being the first thing that pops up when someone searches for your name. What troubles me about this, and that goes in a completely new discussion, is we're kind of turning private companies into kind of gatekeepers of, you know, like it's not like there's a judge saying like, yes, this should be de-indexed. it's Google processing these requests and saying, yeah, that's fine, that's not fine, right? So we're kind of making these big tech companies arbiters of what's acceptable and not acceptable to be in the public realm. And that creates really interesting questions regarding freedom of speech.
Hi, I was curious about the intersection of privacy and workers' rights in terms of corporations accumulating data on the people that work for them. We talk about consent and the use of your data, but if somebody holds the purse strings over your livelihood, that would incline you to consent, whether or not that was entirely consensual. Anyhow, I'm curious about that topic, and maybe it'll be addressed further this afternoon.
So I don't want to monopolize, so please, if anyone wants to jump in, do. So in some states in the US, we have laws that prevent the use of social media data in employment settings, for example, or prevent your employer from even asking you for your account data, which was something that happened a couple of years ago. Yeah, but in general, yeah, you don't have any larger right to your privacy in a work environment if you sign that away as part of your contract. And that's the difference of not having a consumer protection law in general. In Europe, that's not the case. Your employer cannot just spy on you. That doesn't work. I don't know, I don't have a good solution, unfortunately, but it's a big issue.
Well, I think that, so what you've Sarita, go ahead. No, go ahead. So one of the things you're highlighting is the fundamental approach, not just in our sectoral approach, but how we see privacy, where in the EU and other countries around the world, privacy is often viewed as a human right, not a consumer right. Sarita? Yeah. No, did you have a follow-up?
Oh, no, I don't.
Okay. Other questions?
Other than the regulation that does exist currently or the incentive to not be a headline, what incentives are out there or available for companies, particularly established companies, to do right by their users and protect privacy? I mean, is there anything that exists similar to how LEED brought visibility to, green building practices?
Well, I think there's a business case to be made for privacy, and I think one of the big companies you see making a case in that direction is Apple, which is actually very much on the forefront of encrypting devices by default and building all kinds of really interesting privacy-enhancing technologies into their systems. Security researchers sometimes disagree with how they do it, but I think that's a good direction. So I think, like, finding that market and kind of just creating options that protect privacy will bring customers. Signal is another good example, right? So you mentioned that earlier, Alex, that messaging app, millions of people are using Signal within very few years of it being in the market.
But I think most of the signaling that happens in the market is of the negative kind, and of companies that have very bad privacy practices that do result in harms, getting called out for it, and in many cases fined by consumer protection regulators or sued. So, and to some extent that is effective, right? The fact that companies implement privacy policies, the fact that companies implement privacy controls and give people some amount of choice, I think stems from not only wanting not to be creepy, as I think most companies do want not to be creepy, but because the market does punish companies that are out of bounds or too far out of bounds when it comes to what they do to people's data, if that gets discovered. And the problem, I think, as research that we've both done probably has highlighted at different times, is often it's not discovered that a company's practices are leaking vast amounts of information until researchers decide to put them under the microscope.
We have time for one more question.
Hi. So this would be for the whole panel. We talked about passive collection before, which almost implies not knowing about it. But I think, say in the case of Facebook, we willfully accept Facebook to track all our mouse clicks and, mouse over this, right click that, share this. And we might not be aware of all the intricacies of it. So in terms of that being opaque, let's say we put that in front of our kids even, they definitely don't know about it. So just curious thoughts on that. How can we educate people as end users to make them more aware?
Besides attending Data Privacy Day events and teach outs.
So we've done some research in that area. So we actually looked at what are people's privacy expectations. We did this in context of a fitness wearable device. What do they think what that device collects? What information does it share? And we compared that to the actual privacy policy. And if you do this, you can figure out pretty well what are the things that people have a really good mental model and idea of what's going on. Guess what? People know that fitness wearables collect steps. And that's kind of what they're designed to do. So that's maybe not the most important thing you need to tell them about, but most people are not aware that they also share fitness data in aggregated form with advertisers. Right? So that's maybe a data practice that then should be put more at the forefront, and also could be maybe a topic that would require more education. But in general, how do you get people to self-educate more about privacy issues? I think it's really challenging. It's about creating, lowering the threshold of doing it. Privacy sounds so complicated. Right? Security is so complicated. I just figured out how to post something on Facebook. Like, why now I need to worry who can see it? Come on. And so making this easier and kind of integrating privacy controls just as part of the experience. Like an example I like to use is when you buy a car, when you drive a car. When you get to the car, you click your key, the car opens, right? And you drive somewhere, you park, you click the key again, you walk away, and by the time you walk away, you have already forgotten whether you locked your car. Well, that's a security function, not the forgetting, but the key, right? So it's a security function, but it's so ingrained and embedded in how you use this particular technology, the car, that you don't even have to think about it. It's not a threshold for you. And I think we're far away from getting anywhere close to that in terms of more fine-grained privacy controls and security controls, but we're getting there. I think HTTPS, what Alex talked about earlier, so securely accessing websites is another example. You don't think about really whether the link to your online banking site is secure or not. You just assume it is. Right? And yes, there's an indicator somewhere in your browser that tells you that, but often enough people get fooled, and that's when phishing becomes a problem. But basically, it's so ingrained, the threshold is so low to do the right thing that people are doing the thing that's better or good for them. So getting people, thinking about how can you lower the threshold of, making privacy the default or security the default.
All right, I think that question is a good opportunity to try to tie together some of the different things we talked about. Because in addition to all of the things that Florian just mentioned being good ideas, I think maybe a higher level thing that we need to do to educate people to make better decisions in a world of ubiquitous sensors and so on is to get people to rely a bit less on their intuitions. Because they're going to be wrong more often and probably in both directions. You probably don't have a good intuition that the fact that you're on video today and that video is being broadcast over the internet, is it being broadcast over the internet? Right, is going to let advertisers and world governments all locate you to this room in Ann Arbor at this time today, find out who you're next to and all of that, and the exploding myriad of ramifications of all of that. You probably don't have a good intuition. On the other hand, your intuition that is creepy, now that I've mentioned it, probably also isn't a really good guide. Instead, I would advocate education about privacy that focuses on the risks, on the actual negative outcomes that people want to avoid, and about multiple ways to avoid them. One way to avoid being scammed is to make sure that your identity doesn't get stolen. Another way to do that might be to subscribe to a service that monitors your credit report. Yet another way might be to use some other set of good security practices. But there may be alternatives to this notion that we need to be ever vigilant as individuals to the technical change that's happening around us. Maybe instead of that, we should focus our attention on making sure there are regulatory structures in place that give people adequate recourse when harms do happen, and making sure that where there is the possibility of giving people clear controls so that they can be making the choice, so not in the ubiquitous censoring capability, that those controls exist and are easy to use.
So, Susan, Sarita, starting at the other end of the spectrum, children, parents, how do they play a role in the same educational process?
Well, I mean, I do think I resonate really to what you're saying. I think those are really great points about the severe limits of human intuition and putting in sort of regulatory practices. At the same time, it's sort of like this arms race with the ones who are determined to scam people. And certain segments of society are particularly vulnerable to being scammed. And so, people who don't have a lot of familiarity or experience, the elderly, for example, very young children, or maybe even teenagers. So I think those are populations who are more vulnerable to someone potentially wanting to exploit them to, get access to information that could be damaging down the line. So I think it is important to also think about these special groups. And yes, like maybe the average technologically savvy person could, benefit from these opportunities to, opt in or opt out and have sort of government controls. But then I think we also need to think about ways to protect those who, would be vulnerable to situations that may not seem plausible for the majority of the people out there. So,
I think an educational strategy in the context of social media is to use metaphors that are meaningful to people. In the context of families, say parents and kids, you might say, well, they know what it means to have a home for most families, and they know what it means to have a family photograph in the home, and who can see it? People might come visit the home and see it. Family members can see it. People out in the general public should not be able to see it. If they're staring in through the window, that's creepy. And I think those kinds of metaphors help people. You can map those to social media use, even privacy settings in social media. That's something that people, say parents or older adults, can relate to and allow them to have a little more control over their privacy environments that relate these physical and digital worlds.
All right, thank you. So we're to wrap this panel up. We're heading to a break. I want to again mention that in the back of the room, if you have some questions you want to leave for the teach out or even for the next panel up, you can put them on a 3x5 card. There's going to be a recording opportunity after the following panel. There should be coffee and some light refreshments in the back. And why don't you please thank our panelists, and what a great session.